I think we've all heard the case of a little girl who grew up using a wheelchair, told she had countless illnesses, and forced by her mother to undergo unnecessary medical treatments. As the girl grew up, she wanted freedom. Fearing for her life, she plotted her mother's demise. But what if this story is not the truth? What if the medical treatments were necessary? What if the girl was in on the deception? This is the twisted case files of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, Part 3. Gypsy Rose is born. Hello and welcome to Alcatraz True Crime and to part 3 of our deep dive into the twisted case files of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. As I'm sure we all know, Gypsy Rose plotted her mother's demise and later claimed she did this as she was a victim of Munchausen by proxy. She feared for her life, meaning she was given a plea deal and ultimately only served 8 years in prison for her crime, and now she is living free trying to be a social media influencer. Content creators have been combing through the case trying to set the record straight and get the truth out there. I'm looking at what we know now and putting it into a chronological order to give a clear picture of what happened. So I hope you're all well and I hope you have your wellies on, because in this part the waters definitely begin to get muddy. We left off in the second part with Gypsy Rose's parents Rod and Dee Dee Blanchard separating before Gypsy was born. This part begins on July 27th, 1991 in Lafourche Parish, Louisiana, where Gypsy was born, or inflicted on the world. However you want to look at it is fine by me. Rod was a huge Guns N' Roses fan, which explains her unique name. Rod did say that he was present at the hospital for her birth, but in later interviews, Gypsy came out and said that Rod actually was out drinking, a claim that Dee Dee said and most assumed wasn't true, and just Dee Dee trying to paint Rod into a deadbeat dad. But Gypsy has said it in an interview, so I think we can assume that that is actually true. Gypsy was premature and from the start doctors noted an abnormality. Gypsy's head was smaller than average, which is a condition known as microcephaly. Gypsy and her supporters will say that Gypsy was borderline, but to be clear, you either have it or you don't. Her supporters saying that this is borderline is part of a wider minimization that has occurred with Gypsy Rose's actual medical issues. So as things have come out and we have discovered certain things, Gypsy and her supporters will try and minimise them, and we'll see that as we go through. What doctors were not aware of at the time that Gypsy actually had a chromosome disorder called microdeletion 1q21.1. We know this now though, meaning with this knowledge and hindsight we can look back and see her early years through a different lens. Now with the microcephaly and some of Gypsy's unique facial features that fit this chromosomal disorder, doctors most likely did theorise that Gypsy was suffering from some sort of chromosome disorder but just couldn't yet give it a name. When Gypsy was born, Rod and Dee Dee had separated and Dee Dee had moved back in with her parents. In 1991, when Gypsy was 3 months old, Dee Dee believed she had sleep apnea. Dee Dee took her to hospital for this, and Gypsy underwent sleep tests and ended up with a CPAP machine. And articles that I read said that the tests actually came back normal, but Dee Dee insisted for a CPAP. However, on my research, doctors won't give you a CPAP unless the tests indicate that. There is some rare occasions where they will give a CPAP to trial it because there are symptoms, but this isn't standard practice, and this is when testing is unavailable, and it's confirmed that Gypsy was tested. So it seems much more likely that Gypsy actually did have sleep apnea. This is also confirmed by Claude Petrie in the Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose. He says that when Gypsy and Dee Dee lived with them, Gypsy would stop breathing in the night and it was really scary. Rod also says that him and Dee Dee reconciled for a period of time after Gypsy already had the CPAP. Now, I don't know whether you can actually call it a reconciliation. He said it was a period of 3 months, but due to being away on his job, he actually only spent a period of a week with them. But still, you would think if Gypsy was using a CPAP but didn't actually need it, would Rod not have noticed? That's just a thought. And you may be thinking, okay, well, she had a CPAP back then, but now, from all we know, she doesn't suffer with sleep apnea. And children can actually grow out of sleep apnea depending on the cause. There are times that would be due to an underdeveloped airway, and as the airway develops, the sleep apnea resolves. However, if untreated, the sleep apnea can persist and cause long-term health issues. So really, the CPAP seems to have done its job, and as Gypsy continued to grow and develop, the issue was well managed, meaning Dee Dee most likely prevented long-term health issues by getting this sorted in 1991 when she was young. To add weight to this idea, certain chromosome disorders can increase the risk of sleep apnea, and her specific chromosome disorder is one of the conditions, and this is due to a smaller jaw and low muscle tone. Rod recalls that when Gypsy was an early age, Dee Dee believed that her daughter had a chromosomal defect. When she was a toddler, Dee Dee began claiming that Gypsy had seizures, asthma and leukemia, as well as the sleep apnea. Rod said, quote, Dee Dee was saying that Gypsy was sick, had problems sleeping, epilepsy, and it just progressed from there. All the visits, Dee Dee had to be there the whole time. Something never felt right about it. Dee Dee was so controlling, which I don't know about you, that kind of makes it sound like Dee Dee needed to be present at all the hospital visits because that's what he's talking about. But I guess he could mean present for all of his visits. But either way, I don't really see it as too much of a red flag because Rod was 17 when Gypsy was conceived, so he would have still been a teenager. He worked away a lot, so he wasn't really there for the day-to-day care of Gypsy. I think that's quite a responsible thing of Dee Dee to do, to supervise the visits, just to make sure that Rod was capable of looking after her. And also, if he meant that she needed to be present at every hospital visit, I think it would raise more of a red flag to me if Dee Dee didn't want to be present, because what mother wouldn't want to be present at their child's hospital visits when they're suffering from all these ailments? We know that Gypsy as a child had strabismus, and this has been confirmed, and you can see this from pictures of her. Her eyes are misaligned, which can cause double or blurry vision, meaning you can get eye strain and headaches, and if not treated, these things can get worse. And as a child, it can affect school performance and overall quality of life and actually lead to you going blind.
When I looked in her earlier medical records, Gypsy had strabismus as an infant, which is when one eye or both wander. And over time, you go blind.
Gypsy had surgery to correct the issue, and Gypsy and her supporters, again, they will say that Dee Dee pushed for this surgery, and although she did have the strabismus, she just had a mild vision impairment and didn't require the surgery. But with strabismus in children, doctors will trial other treatments first, and then when that doesn't work, they will go to surgery. Dee Dee would not just be able to walk into the doctors, and when the doctor offers her alternative treatments, she couldn't just decline and say, nope, I want the surgery, and they say, okay, sorry Miss Blanchard, we'll get that sorted for you right away. That is not how it works, so Gypsy would have needed this surgery. There's a YouTube channel called Becca Scoops, and I'm sure that many of us are aware of Becca Scoops. It's a channel with Becca, a former psych and ICU RN, and her partner Mitch, a former veteran detective. And they've been going through the Gypsy Rose case and bringing to light the inconsistencies out there in the media. If you're not aware of Becca, please go watch her videos. Her research and attention to detail is amazing. In one of her episodes, Cops Spill Hot Tea about Gypsy Rose Blanchard Part 3, Becca breaks down the procedures that are confirmed that Gypsy underwent. These include her eye muscle surgeries, a leg muscle biopsy surgery to check for muscular dystrophy, and a couple of procedures related to her GI tract, which was having her salivary glands removed, and a gastro-reflex laparoscopic procedure to reduce vomiting. This is important to note because in an interview with Dr. Phil when Gypsy was in prison, she states that she had 30 plus surgeries. And as we can see from this list, it's definitely not 30 plus. She also has drawn a diagram while she was in prison to show to her now ex-husband Ryan Anderson of all her scars, and there is definitely not 30. The scars very much reflect the list that I have just read. And to break down all of these things, we've already gone over the eyes, those were necessary. And with the muscular dystrophy is a chromosomal genetic disorder in itself. We know that Dee Dee thought Gypsy had a chromosome disorder, and we know that doctors probably suspected it. And what's interesting is her specific chromosome disorder, it wasn't discovered till many years later. So even if doctors suspected there was something going on, they couldn't give a name to it. However, we have claims from Bobby Petrie, which is Gypsy's cousin, who has spoken out in support of Gypsy and spoken about his aunt's behaviour. He said that Dee Dee would look up all these medical terms, conditions and symptoms and say that Gypsy had them. And I'm just going to put that in another way to make it less nefarious, because I think this is most likely what happened in my opinion. But we all know when you consult with Dr. Google, it's a thing that most of us do. So what I'm saying and what I'm comparing it to, I guess, is some normal behaviour of Dee Dee suspected a chromosome disorder. She then had Gypsy, who was having actual symptoms of said disorder, and she was looking up chromosome disorders to see what could fit, and came across muscular dystrophy that might have had a lot of symptoms similar. And the muscle biopsy to rule out muscular dystrophy, it wasn't done until Gypsy was about 10 years old, so I mean that's quite a big span of time where Dee Dee just wouldn't have known that she definitely didn't have muscular dystrophy. And then the last two procedures, we know that Gypsy did have problems with her GI tract, and these were her most troubling symptoms. We know that her type of chromosome disorder causes a range of feeding issues, such as poor feeding and food intolerances, GERD, which causes reflux, constipation, gastroparesis and food allergies. Some children who have the microdeletion will show no symptoms at all, which is what Gypsy claims today. This is what I meant about the complete minimization. Gypsy claims she was completely asymptomatic. But how can this be the case when we already know she had the eye muscle issues and sleep apnea? And these are confirmed in the medical records through testing. It is also shown in the medical records that she was an inpatient in a feeding hospital for a month, so the symptoms from her GI tract would have not been able to be feigned by Dee Dee, because Gypsy would have been around hospital staff for a month that saw the same thing, because after that stint in hospital she got a feeding tube. And some will point to this and say that this is a particularly nefarious sign of Munchausen by proxy.
Many things that were alarming, many things that were just make you cringe as to what Gypsy endured. I think the feeding tube is one of the things that gives me the most alarm, because once a child has a tube that either goes through their nose and into their stomach, or directly surgically a tube that goes into their stomach, that parent can put in any kind of poisoning or medicine or toxin, and they can also starve the child.
And again, just like the CPAP, reports in the media claim that the findings were inconclusive or inconsistent, and Dee Dee was just pushing for the feeding tube anyway. And I already went through that with the sleep apnea. The doctors just wouldn't do that. And if they did, I want to ask this: why is no lawyer picking this case up for a medical malpractice lawsuit? Because that would be a pretty big payout. Is it because when experts actually looked at the medical records, they saw that these procedures were absolutely necessary? Gypsy claims that her mother would never let her eat, but she herself knew that she could eat and didn't really understand why she needed the feeding tube. To be clear, people who have feeding tubes can still take in food orally. They can take in small amounts, and this isn't for everyone, but some people still like the bit of food orally while getting the supplemented nutrition via the tube. And we have multiple reports that Gypsy was eating whilst with her mother, and even a video of Gypsy eating royal mashed potatoes at Disney World is quite an infamous video in the case.
Hi everybody, right now I'm in Cinderella's castle eating some royal mashed potatoes.
So reports will say that Gypsy was walking normally up until the age of 7 or 8 when Gypsy Rose started using a wheelchair. Gypsy says this was following a motorbike accident where a young Gypsy Rose scraped her knee, and Dee Dee basically made a mountain out of a molehill, took her to hospital and ended up in a wheelchair. Apparently the hospital staff declined to give her a wheelchair, and Dee Dee just kept persisting and in the end managed to source one herself. However, she wasn't walking normally up until this time, because Gypsy did actually have a walker.
She had me use a walker before the wheelchair, and then after that motorcycle accident, put in the wheelchair.
Why did she tell you you had to be on a walker?
She said that I had muscular dystrophy.
So I don't understand why the motorbike is the precipitating event for the wheelchair. Why was she in a walker before that? And that's never really been addressed of why she was in the walker. And we know that Dee Dee did claim that Gypsy had muscular dystrophy, and this wasn't ruled out till age 10. With muscular dystrophy, it causes weak muscles, and with Gypsy's chromosomal disorder, that causes muscle weakness as well. So I guess I'm just wondering if the walker was actually needed, and maybe the wheelchair was some kind of embellishment. And we know that Dee Dee does like to embellish. Some of Gypsy's medical conditions are not confirmed, but again, she wasn't really having treatment for these. It was what Dee Dee would just say outwardly, which kind of plays into this motivations. Some claim that Dee Dee was trying to get Rod back with all these claims of Gypsy's health, trying to get him to see that she needed support. But by this time, Rod actually had another child called Nicolette with another woman shortly after Gypsy Rose was born, and then he went on to marry Christy, who he had began dating when Gypsy was 6 months old, and they went on to have their 2 children, Mia, who is featured on the documentaries and Gypsy's reality TV series and is active on her social media, but her brother, who is called Dylan, from what I could find out, wants no part of the case and wants to stay hidden. So in the last part, I did empathise with Rod that 17 is very young to have a child and start a family, and I empathised with him that Dee Dee was 23 when he was 17, so there was a bit of a power imbalance there. However, I massively side-eye him for this behaviour. He already had one child and that was too much responsibility, so learn from your mistakes, dude. Like, come on. This must have been still when he was very young if he had another child, Nicolette, and then got with Christy when Gypsy was 6 months old, and also had that reconciliation with Dee Dee. So I think it's clear from this timeline that there was overlap between them, in my opinion, and just why are you having more kids? It doesn't make any sense. So Dee Dee was a single mum, and she did seem to be already struggling financially. She was writing bad checks. We know after Gypsy was born, she worked in a bar, but she also had a sick child with legitimate medical issues. She was a single parent. I just think that she could have started off the falsities to get Rod back and then realised that it was actually beneficial to her financially to play up these conditions because people were more generous and giving, and then it just spiraled from there. I'm not saying that this is right. I am not justifying that behaviour. It's obviously not good. However, I think when you look at it that way, it's a lot less nefarious than the claims that Dee Dee wanted to put her child through all this torment and unnecessary medical procedures just for that element of control and attention. Rod claims that Gypsy was kept from him and that Dee Dee would be a roadblock for contact, but we have so many pictures of them all together, and even one where Dee Dee and Gypsy appears to have attended Rod and Christy's wedding. So how sour could it have all been? I know that people have reported that after their split, Dee Dee was very scathing about Rod and did have these claims painting him out to be a really bad dad. However, he even admits himself he just wasn't there when Gypsy was young. He worked away a lot. He didn't really have time for anyone else, but he still managed to get someone else pregnant and start dating a whole other person. But he says he didn't really have time for anything else, but he certainly didn't seem to have much time for Gypsy. And yes, should we all just be great human beings and never be scathing about our exes? I guess you could argue that, but as humans we are imperfect, Dee Dee included in that. And I think by saying that Rod was kept from Gypsy, it's just another way of villainising Dee Dee when the real truth appears that Rod kept his distance and didn't really mind that much because there were steps that he could have taken if he so wished to get that contact. This goes back to what I said in part 1 where I said that Dee Dee was given worse than the death penalty, and Dee Dee's choices and behaviour are often used as a justification for that, and the justification usually is that Dee Dee had Munchausen by proxy, she gave Gypsy all these unnecessary medical conditions, she isolated Gypsy from friends, family and pretty much the outside world, and some more concerning claims later on, when we start to break it down and realizing that the medical treatments were actually necessary, it still doesn't paint Dee Dee in a good light that she was embellishing and exaggerating, getting money from charities. But if Gypsy was really sick, then the justification and the mitigating circumstances aren't really there. So I'm just going to jump in here, as at the time I recorded this episode, the foyers from Into the Weeds podcast, the most recent ones, had not yet come out. However, now they have. Everything we've got so far, bar one video that I'm about to talk about, is kind of things to bring in later anyway, which is a good thing, because I want to make sure the videos are accurate as I go through. But one thing that is relevant to this video is a video that I will play now on the screen, and then we'll discuss it.
Hi, my love. I wanted to show you something special, something that I haven't showed you before, mainly because I was scared to and I didn't really know how to. So, anyway, this is what I want to show you.
Sorry. I checked, but...
But I don't think it's the dress that you're probably excited about right now. Finally nice to show you after all this time. I'm sorry to keep it a secret from you for so long, but it's not just you that I'm keeping it a secret from. It's sort of like everybody who knows me. I don't even know how I got started. When I was 6 years old, I went into the hospital for like 6 months, and the doctors told me that I had a seizure in surgery, and I wouldn't be able to walk, that I was paralyzed permanently. And that part, like the part that I had a seizure, was true. In surgery, I had the seizure and I was paralyzed, but what they didn't know is that it was temporary paralysis and not permanent. And by the time I started to get my feeling back in my legs, and I hadn't tried to walk then, but I was too young and I just kept to myself. And throughout the years, I tried to tell my mom a few times, and I guess I was just afraid of her not loving me as much as she does if I couldn't walk. You know, I didn't want to make her sad or lose any love from her. I guess that's the reason why I kept it a secret from her. And so I just kept it to myself for a long time until 2011, whenever I sort of started rebelling as a teenager and ran away from home, ran away from home, stumbled. Before I ran away, I started trying to walk as much as I could. And I just got enough strength to be able to leave home. Unfortunately, it was to the wrong person. And so Mom's kind of in denial in a way. I don't really know, because I guess it would be too hard to explain to all our friends and everything. And one thing I never want to go is like a liar. And believe me, I would like for people to know the truth, but being as it is, I would lose a lot of friends, I think. And I just don't want anybody to hate me. And they would. And so you're the only person that knows besides me and that one other guy, which he's not in my life anymore, so, and we're not even friends anymore, so he doesn't. So right now, you're the only person that knows. It feels great. It feels really, really nice to just have somebody that accepts me and you accepted me even when you thought that I was in a wheelchair, and living my life in a wheelchair, I have to tell everybody that I am. And anyway, it's difficult.
So just for context, this is a video that she sends to Nicholas Godejohn to let him know that she can actually walk and doesn't need a wheelchair, and explains to him the reason why. This has come out in a new lot of foyers from Into the Weeds, who have been releasing lots of Gypsy Rose foyers from the Nicholas Godejohn files, and before that her prison emails and some other bits from the Gypsy Rose case files that the public had not seen before. So yeah, there it is. It's a pretty explosive video. I don't know what to make of that video, and I'll tell you why I don't know what to make of it is because I don't trust Gypsy. I don't trust Gypsy, I don't trust Rod, I don't trust Christy, I don't trust the Petries, I don't trust any of them. The only thing I would trust is medical records, and there are certain things that we can deduce and make quite good assumptions, I think. However, without having the medical records that she did have a seizure during surgery and spent 6 months in the hospital and doctors thought she was paralysed, we just don't know. And it seems that people in the family did say back in Louisiana that they knew she could walk after the wheelchair came about. I don't know if they caught her walking and Dee Dee was just in denial. Who knows? We don't have Dee Dee's side of things, and to be honest, if we did, I'm not sure I would fully trust her either. I guess it's just important to bring in, and it would kind of tie in what I'm going to talk about in my next video, because I do believe that Gypsy care elicited a lot from people, and this is her saying it in her own words to Nicholas Godejohn. However, the reason why I don't want to just believe everything she's saying in this video is because we know she was manipulating Nicholas Godejohn. So I have to look at every video she was doing as part of a manipulation where there could be lies in it. There could be some truth to it. It could all be the truth. There could be some lies to it. We just don't know. So I found it interesting. I thought it's worth playing. However, it's only just come out. I'm digesting it along with everyone else. I'm just not sure what to make of it. So it will be brought up in the next video where we go through Munchausen, malingering and care eliciting and kind of see what fits where. But yeah, I just wanted to put it in this video and make it known that there now is a alternative narrative to why she was in the wheelchair. In 1997, Dee Dee's mother Emma died, and there are claims from the Petrie family, so Dee Dee's side of the family, that Dee Dee was part to blame for this because Emma was sick and actively dying, and there are reports that Dee Dee was starving her. However, if any of you out there know about end-of-life care, you would know that people don't generally eat when they're actively dying. They don't need food to sustain them because their body is shutting down. So I feel like, again, there could just be an innocent explanation for this, and also, why are all these people just watching this happen and not getting involved? Now, Dee Dee was actually kicked out of the family home, and her and Gypsy were moving from place to place. They didn't have much stability, probably because of financial issues. I know they were in Section 8 government housing at one point and living off welfare, and it's claimed that she was kicked out of the house because relatives just had enough of her grifting ways, writing bad checks, shoplifting, so she was kicked out and on their own. However, she then had a bad car accident and her foot actually almost got severed off. So she's in hospital recovering, and a young Gypsy Rose goes back to live with her grandparents, her grandpa Claude and her step-grandma Laura. And then after Dee Dee had recovered in hospital, she came back home to her family home to carry on her recovery, so Gypsy had other people there to look after her. However, this didn't last long because Dee Dee was also accused of attempting to poison her stepmother Laura. Laura was sick in hospital for a period of about 9 months, and no one really knew why until Gypsy Rose pointed to a bottle of Roundup, the weed killer, and said that's the special medicine that Mama puts in Grandma Laura's food. This cannot be confirmed, and we only have anecdotal evidence of such. No charges were ever filed about this, but the family did suspect this, so she was then kicked out again. But from some reports and some research that I found, Apparently, the Petries also cite another reason they kicked Dee Dee out the house, and they claimed that they knew Gypsy's medical conditions weren't real, and they saw Dee Dee's mistreatment of Gypsy. And that made me really scratch my head, because I don't know about you, if I saw a family member claiming that a child had all these illnesses that I know they didn't have and was mistreating them, then I would do something about it. I wouldn't just kick them out to be on their own alone with the child. I mean, that seems ludicrous if they all knew about it, and it's very much painted when you hear, and it's very much painted in the way of people who knew them in Louisiana, friends and family who knew them for quite a long time. It's very much painted as, well, that's just Dee Dee, so we're not going to do anything about it. Or, you know, I did want to ask, I did want to do something, but I didn't want to offend Dee Dee, and, you know, she's so manipulative.
Her sister told me once, Rod, you know, Gypsy can walk. And I asked Dee Dee about it. She's like, well, you know, with her muscular dystrophy or with her disease, her muscles hurt sometimes. So sometimes she can walk when she's feeling okay, but it's progressive. It's going to get worse. And it wasn't long after that they were, you know, they started moving further and further away. And, you know, there's nobody there to question that anymore.
Surely it would, if she's so manipulative, no one would even know, and surely it just makes you look better if they came out and said years later, we had no idea, we're so shocked about this. But apparently everyone knew and just didn't do anything about it, because apparently Dee Dee's such this horrible monster that no one could stand up to her and do anything. It's just so bizarre to me. We need to talk about the head shaving, and I couldn't find an exact date of when Dee Dee started shaving Gypsy's head, but Gypsy says her mother would shave her head and say because she had leukemia and was taking cancer medicine, it would fall out anyway, so it's best to keep it nice and neat and shave it. And to get cancer medicine, Dee Dee would have needed a diagnosis of cancer, so I don't believe Gypsy was ever given cancer medication, in my opinion. That would be another thing that could be medical malpractice, but again, no lawyer wants to take this case. We know that Dee Dee liked to embellish, as I've already said, and we know that these things had already been claimed. And I'm going to kind of pose two theories that I believe could have happened. So the first theory that many people think is that Dee Dee and Gypsy had a conversation, and Dee Dee basically told Gypsy, oh, you like all the nice stuff we get, you like the trips we get, so if you want that to carry on, we just need to shave your head. Or my theory that I think is most likely, just solely my opinion, is there's a mental health condition called trichotillomania, which is basically a hair pulling condition where people experience overwhelming urges to pull out their hair, which can be any type of body hair, head hair, eyebrows, eyelashes, or other parts of the body. This can be part of other mental health conditions, and it can be a way to help manage stress and overwhelming emotions. So Gypsy is actually predisposed to mental health conditions because of her chromosome disorder. We know that Gypsy also has a thing about her hair since being out of prison. She has changed it more times than I can count. We know that in prison, when her ex-fiance, now baby daddy, Ken, broke up with her, she went into the bathroom and hacked her hair off with nail clippers. I'm just wondering that if, as a child, if she had this problem regulating emotions and dealing with overwhelm, could she have had this disorder and started pulling out clumps of her hair? And Dee Dee, wanting to manage this, just said, let's shave your hair and keep it nice and neat. Do I think it's right to shave a child's head and claim to other people that they have cancer? I think it goes without saying that I think that is absolutely wrong. However, I think if this were the case and Gypsy was pulling it out anyway, shaving the head kind of served two purposes. In an ideal world, if that is the case, Dee Dee should have then got Gypsy help and not just shaved off her head, okay? Dee Dee is not a perfect person, and when we're trying to set the record straight, I think it's good to look at the good and the bad, because if you excuse every bit of Dee Dee's behaviour, then we're still not getting closer to the truth. We need to acknowledge that a lot of people in this story have problematic behaviours. Dee Dee and Gypsy began receiving gifts from charities, donations, trips to Disney World, Gypsy was actually queen for a day and was featured in an article for a local paper in 2001. So with all this charitable handouts for a single mum who doesn't have the means to give their child this sort of lifestyle, where they're going on excited trips, they're getting preferential treatment, they're getting everything given to them, and people around them think they're just so special and amazing, I can see a world where Dee Dee would reconcile the fact that she was lying and scamming everyone, which, like I said, is wrong. But Dee Dee could have thought, I could never give Gypsy this type of lifestyle, and I want Gypsy to have everything. Because when we go on to later parts, we're really going to see one of Dee Dee's worst parenting mistakes was Dee Dee completely enabling Gypsy and creating her to be an entitled person. Aside from Gypsy's medical issues, it was claimed after the crime that Gypsy never went to school.
Do you remember going to school?
I've never been to school.
Never got to go to kindergarten?
No, sir.
And that she was homeschooled by her mum, but there wasn't really any curriculum that they would follow, and mainly her life consisted of hospitals, watching Disney movies, and Gypsy said the reason she learned to read and write so well is because she read all the Harry Potter books. And this is something that people have said, they are surprised at how well Gypsy can write and articulate herself, considering she didn't have any formal schooling. But I don't know much about children's education, but that seems quite extraordinary you'd be able to teach yourself so well from Harry Potter, but I don't know enough to say if it's possible or not. Information came out that this isn't even true, as Gypsy, at least until 8 or 9 years old, was attending a private Catholic school. There is actually a picture of her in school uniform, which will be up on the screen, but it isn't known if she was there longer than 8 or 9 years. That's all I could find out. Christy also confirmed she did go for a few months and she loved it, and then Dee Dee pulled her out because she was sick. I can imagine that Gypsy probably missed a load of days, but she still did end up going to school, and this is one of the things about Gypsy's overall behaviour and the way she's acted after her crime is she will embellish things that just don't need to be embellished. Just say you went to school, I don't understand it. And I find it really ironic how Gypsy will embellish all of these things, but really that's the worst crime that her mother did. Why Gypsy plotted to take her life, so it's ironic to me that Gypsy is out here doing the same thing. Just one more thing to talk about in this episode, and that is alleged sexual abuse from Gypsy's grandfather Claude. In a documentary, Prison Confessions, Gypsy reveals that she suffered sexual abuse at the hands of Claude. Claude was featured in the same documentary and confronted with the question of whether it's true or not. And of course, on a documentary, Claude denied these accusations. And Gypsy was surprised at this, that he didn't admit to it. I don't know, why would you be surprised at that? That always made me raise an eyebrow, but I would never discount claims of sexual abuse. Obviously, he is not charged or convicted. There is no evidence, just Gypsy's word. And as we go through the other parts, there are going to be times that Gypsy lies about other instances of sexual abuse from other people. So unfortunately, when you lie so much, it does become harder to believe these claims. Other members of the Petrie family have come out and said that they do not believe this occurred, and I found the timing quite suspicious because this was coming up to Gypsy's release, and as we'll see in later parts when we go through her time in prison, Gypsy was working really hard on a media campaign for when she got out of prison. She was writing books and had this documentary series and had her Lifetime show, and she was chatting to her media team, and they were really harping on the fact that they wanted these things to have brand new, never heard before information. So I find it quite suspicious, the timing, but again, I can't fully discount it. Gypsy actually says her mother admitted to Gypsy that she had been sexually abused by her dad as well. But again, Dee Dee's not here to tell us that. We don't know that for a fact. And strangely enough, Gypsy has also said that her mother was very upset when Gypsy told her about it. Dee Dee was blaming herself, so Gypsy just kind of never brought it up again. But then we have a different version where Gypsy admits this to Dee Dee, and Dee Dee also confides in Gypsy. So there's just a lot I side-eye with this accusation, so do with it what you will. We're going to wrap it up here, and next time is going to be a video that delves into looking at Munchausen by proxy, malingering by proxy, and care eliciting, and seeing which ones fit Gypsy and Dee Dee. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this part. I'm just someone who's interested in true crime and want to find like-minded people out there. So please do comment your thoughts, opinions, theories, or anything I've missed out down below. If you like the video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any future uploads. I shall see you next time for part 4. Bye!